It has been over a half a century since I took graduate courses in criminology. The first one I took was in summer school with a visiting professor who had studied under a criminologist named Sutherland. Sutherland was one of the pioneers in the area of criminology, and back then he was well thought of, as was a few others, or as were a few others. But one of the theories that Sutherland had was a theory of corrections. If a person shows criminal behavior, what do you do with him? How do you treat him? In what way can you change the behavior? Well, that has come a long way in the last half century, from phrenology to personality theory, Gestalt theory, all kinds of things. But one of the things Sutherland said, and back then most criminologists believed, that first off, criminals and delinquents were impulsive. And research pretty much bears that out. Secondly, he went into a large discourse about how a lot of dichotomous minds, which criminals seem to have, couldn't differentiate between degrees of good and bad. In other words, it was either good or bad. It was either on or off. It was either this or that. A form of dichotomous thinking, which is one of the more primitive forms of thought. So we have dichotomous thought coming out today with the advent of artificial intelligence and computerization and things such as that. One of the things that I want to talk about today is the fact that from the classical theory that I was trained under, you could say that our government is run by a bunch of delinquents. Sutherland theorized that the way you treat criminality or delinquency was you trained the subjects, the miscreants, whatever you want to call them. I hate to use the term criminals, but that's a legal term rather than a criminological one, but apparently it sort of fits. There are a lot of crimes that really weren't crimes of common law. They differentiate between crimes and violations has become less and less distinct. But let's go with the crime of common law crimes: theft, arson, battery, assault, etc. If you are running a correctional facility, how do you treat these people? Well, Sutherland said the first thing you had to do, and the most effective thing that you should do, is to treat the miscreant and to teach them that there's a difference between running a stop sign and committing murder. Now, the simple-minded, dichotomous thinker will think the law is the law. If you break the law, you're a criminal. If you don't break the law, you're not. And they don't see a difference in degree. So as far as the immature criminal is concerned, running a stop sign and murder are the same thing. You violated the law, you should get punished. It's a matter of degree. Well, you can see this a lot in childlike behavior. A child commits some sort of offense, and the parent says, you committed that offense, we're going to have to discipline you. And the child immediately says, well, Johnny did it. What about Johnny? Well, I didn't catch Johnny, I caught you. If I catch Johnny, then I'll punish Johnny. Now, look at what's going on in our society today with the presidential race. You have a president that's been indicted for various things. The latest thing is failure to return documents belonging to the U.S. government, some of which were secured. And the defense is not that he didn't do it or it wasn't a crime. His defense is Hillary did it. So if Hillary can do it, I can do it. The difference is that Hillary probably committed the equivalent of running a stop sign, whereas the other person did the equivalent of grand theft auto or even maybe assault with a deadly weapon. There's a big difference between the two. And the fans are not able to discern the big difference. They can't differentiate between a minor and a major incident or a minor and a major offense. It really doesn't matter to them because they can't see the differentiation. They are incapable of that kind of differentiation. So, somebody says, well, Trump didn't return the classified documents. He broke the law. Well, Hillary broke the law by not using an official government server. So how do you explain that? Well, you don't explain that. You say, look, you dipshit, there's a difference. There's a difference in intent. There's a difference in degree, etc. And when confronted, Hillary complied and said, I'm sorry, and turned things over. When the President Biden was confronted with having secret documents, he turned them over and apologized. The President Trump didn't turn them over. He delayed and he obfuscated, he lied, he did all kinds of things, and essentially acted like a king rather than an elected official. And he claimed the equivalent of a royal prerogative. That is not the situation in the United States, nor has it been in the situation in Anglo-American jurisprudence. We can go back to Henry II, and he was a good administrator, but he was kind of mean, sadistic, stubborn, and selfish. So they held him at knife point or sword point and made him sign this document called Magna Carta. And when they lowered their blades and said, thank you, King, for signing this and giving us some rights and freedoms, the king said, you're quite welcome. And as soon as he got 10 miles away, he said, I didn't mean it. I had my fingers crossed. We have the divine right of kings, and it's my divine right of kings to do as I please, and you can't make me waive any of those rights. So I'm not going to. I was anointed by God, and I was put here by God, and I am God's messenger, God's appointee. So if you offend me, you're offending God. And if you offend God, I can punish you because I'm the hand of God. And that started all of the fight all over again that the Magna Carta was for. We have a situation going on now in this country where we have an ex-president who actually acts like he was king. He believes he had king's prerogative to do as he pleased and act as he pleased, etc. And he did. And he thought he was anointed king by God rather than elected as president. And as such, he didn't have to give up the presidency. And he felt he had the right to do anything he could to interfere with the transition of power. which he did. Now, it gets complicated after this point because the propaganda thing comes into effect. I think some people, the more well-read people, the people that think about things, that are informed, can see that there was an election, that the election had to have some validity as it did in the past, and that you don't, in good conscience, challenge elections, particularly after the fact. So you graciously concede the election. I remember in my own election, I was kind of screwed. I think the county chairman changed the rules. It was a primary election. I lost by 221 votes. And 2 weeks before the primary, the chairman said you had to live in the precinct 30 days. Well, the election that year was the first time that 18-year-olds were able to vote. And they were mainly my constituency. And my constituency consisted of college students. And college students hadn't returned yet to the university for a full 30 days. So with the stroke of a pen and a rule, the county chairman disenfranchised about 3,000 of my votes for voters. I lost by 229 votes. So out of that 3,000 disenfranchised voters, I really believe I could have got another 229. Well, it didn't matter. And I graciously called up my opponent and congratulated him on winning and conceded that he won. Because the only way he would not have won is had I contested and said he disenfranchised my voters, which would have cost a lot of money, which I didn't have, and would have proven futile and probably made me a lame duck district attorney. I don't know that it would have or not, but there was a good chance of that. And in any event, it wasn't in the public's best interest for me to do that. I was under 30, and I think probably the voters were right. I needed a little more seasoning. They had no way of knowing that the government would come after me because they scared the shit out of them for some reasons. And the reason they went after me was for the same reason that they were afraid of Danny Casolaro. I had run into some stuff that I shouldn't have and put together some stuff that I shouldn't have put together and sociogrammed the drug trade in Boulder, which as a sociologist I was able to do, and since I was the only one that had been trained as a sociologist practicing law here in Boulder, it was revealing what I discovered. And what I discovered is there were certain groups that were in the drug trafficking, and one certain group that never seemed to get arrested. And that was the beginning of a long and arduous process where I discovered that the government, and particularly certain agents of the government, were smuggling drugs into the United States to fund operations off the books. Then after they did that, they also set up confiscation laws and confiscation procedures where a whole area of government became self-funding. And if they're self-funding, they're not subject to the will of Congress. And a colleague of mine, Dan Casolaro, called it the octopus. I had no inkling that was what he was talking about at the time, but after having an IRS agent tell me that a government agency wanted to put me out of business, and they gave their best shot, and a few other near misses with death and a few things like that, it didn't take me long to take the hint. Plus, some of my clients had information from the government and kind of tipped me off what was going on. So anyway, that's part of the old story, and I'm going to get into a lot of that. But right now, I did draw a few conclusions from my election, and that is as follows. First off, when I ran for election, there were a few of us that sort of campaigned together, shared some expenses, shared transportation, etc. They were Tony Volokh, Ken Monfort, and myself. Tony Volokh ended up being a Supreme Court judge in Colorado. Monfort had a meatpacking company that was eventually owned or taken over by ConAgra. And we all had our little different experiences with politics. None of them were that pleasant. But I think mine were probably the most unpleasant because I was able to infer certain things because of the cases that I did in my clientele. One of the things that happened that I can remember vividly is Ken Monfort talked to me one time about, since his party had won and he was a big donor to his party, he was going to be able to have some input on who the U.S. attorney would be. Well, what I told him is a friend of mine was a top candidate, but he wasn't from his county that Monfort was from. And I told Monfort, I said, whoever you have the best accessibility with is who you should support for that position. And there was somebody from his own county that he decided to support. Right after that, some of my informers came to me and said that the candidate was a member of the Minutemen, and he drilled up Stove Prairie with various militiamen, the extreme right-wing people, and they were members of the Birch Society and the group that wanted to guard the Platte River from Soviet submarines and things like that. A bunch of probably what you would call nowadays crackpots. And I had other rumors to that effect, which led me to believe that probably you couldn't get in a very high elective office in this country unless somebody in the government who had something to lose could get something on you and keep you in line, because they didn't want a bunch of rogues running around, raising hell, upsetting the apple cart, and interfering with their little businesses, that they could have slush funds to support revolutions and things like this. So that was just my conclusion from that one little experience. Throughout my career, I was able to add to that by several experiences, one of which was having represented some CIA officers, others having represented intelligence officers of the IRS, and some of which was a consequence of a lot of government agents getting to know the truth and tipping me off on what was happening. There wasn't anything I could really do about it, but it was interesting anyway to know what was going on and to discern at least what was going on. After the election, the day after, I got a call from the county clerk, or clerk and recorder, that said the Intelligence Division of the Internal Revenue Service was over in the courthouse snooping around and asking questions about me. So that was the day after I got this tip. And I started taking a defensive position at that time. I won't go into all the trauma that I had, but suffice it to say that a political operative in Denver suggested I merge my law firm with his, And he had been U.S. attorney, and the other people in his firm had been chief of Bureau of Indian Affairs, uh, Bureau of Land Management, upper echelon, a former lieutenant governor, uh, the son of a former federal judge. And this guy had been U.S. attorney under Truman and had been one of the few successful U.S. attorneys that had indicted and convicted mafia people in Denver. So there was a little bit of political power, and it sort of kept me afloat there for a while. One of the things we did was catch the government in a civil rights violation, and I made a deal with the agent that if he told me what was going on, I wouldn't sue his ass and make his life as uncomfortable as he had made mine. That seemed to be a reasonable solution on his part. So he gave me a pretty good statement about what was going on. And at that time I thought I'd pissed off the Drug Enforcement Agency, which hadn't been the case. Or I thought it was because of the little war between Hoover and Helms that started over the Tannenbaum Reha affair, both of whom were clients of mine earlier. But they said, no, it was the CIA that asked the IRS to audit me and step on me and put me out of business. It was shortly after that confession that they came into my office and grabbed my dictaphone, my typewriters and office equipment, and essentially put me out of business for a while. After that, then they decided they wanted to investigate, and they subpoenaed me in front of some grand juries to ask me about the CIA involvement with drug trafficking, to find out how much I knew. And I think some of the prior things, or at least in Dennett's comments, I talked about that, my experience in Detroit, my experience with Michael Palmer, and people involved with the Hall Ranch, etc. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we get into some of the stuff that I'm going to bring up now. Since things have calmed down and a lot of stuff has been on the news, a lot of my story is now a matter of public information. I can now tell it. For those of you interested in reading some background material, go to the internet and look up Thomas Riha, R-I-H-A, look up the Houston Plan, look up MK Ultra, MK Delta, look up Hoover, Helms battle, look up the breach of liaison between CIA and the FBI. There's also a reporter for the Washington Post that named William Wise that wrote about this. And that's good for a start, and I'll give you some more citations as we get into this. But I hope you will like my channel. I hope you will recommend it to others, because there's a lot of information that I'm starting to decide to tell right now. And you're going to have to follow this with a very detailed understanding of the history of drug trafficking and essentially opium trafficking and expensive drug trafficking since the Transcontinental Railroad and the British Opium Wars right before our Civil War. And I hope during the process of all of my videos that we can tie it together in some logical sense and credible sense that you can see in the hot water in which we're in, and the fact that we really need to change. So with that, I leave you, and like my channel, recommend my channel, please subscribe to my channel. You can maybe even make 10 subscriptions, the more the merrier, I don't care. But I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.